Welcome everybody to another screencast. Our topic today is immigrant urbanization. In our last screencast, we talked about the voyage from Europe to the United States. Now we're going to talk about what happens once they leave the immigration station at Ellis Island and enter the big city of New York. Our three learning outcomes: you should be able to identify the advantages and disadvantages of living in an enclave. You should be able to explain how Jacob Riis tried to improve the lives of immigrants. And lastly, describe the response nativists had towards immigrants. The first thing that is really apparent in New York City is the lack of sanitation. You can see in this picture here, these children are playing within 5 feet of a dead horse. This is prior to a sanitation workforce, real trashmen to come around and clean up everyone's waste. So this was a extreme problem, not just with dead animals, but also with horse waste in the streets because there is no vehicles at this point. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the traffic jam. It was not created with the automobile. The traffic jam precedes the automobile. Take a look at this picture right here. This is from New York City. You can see trolleys and horse-drawn wagons and people all mixed together. So traffic jam is not a modern thing. It actually dates back pre-1900. Now, where these immigrants are living is something called an enclave. And this would be Little Italy, Little Hungary, Chinatown, Koreatown, Little Saigon, anything that you can think of, which is a highly concentrated ethnic community. These are very prominent in New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh for this time period. We're going to focus on New York City specifically. Now, there are advantages to living in this type of situation. You are speaking the same language, so when you get here, you're not completely alienated. You can find a job pretty quickly. You can find housing pretty quickly. The customs are all the same. The food is all the same. And you can practice your same religion very easily here. However, the disadvantages, in my opinion, outweigh those advantages. The conditions are very poor, substandard living conditions. New York City is not prepared for the amount of people that is going to come here in that short period of time. They are very cramped quarters. A lot of people are sharing, a lot of families are sharing living arrangements. Sanitation, like I said before, there's an underdeveloped sewer. We don't have a professional waste management to come around and collect all of our trash. There's no electric lights, and with a newly developed police staff, there's just not enough people to keep the community safe. And the biggest thing of all, these people are not learning how to speak English, so they're not learning to interact with those immigrants who have been here for a few generations. Hester Street is a Jewish neighborhood, so you can see you have these carts where people are going to come out every day and try and sell their produce and their goods. Mulberry Street is known as Little Italy, and you can see how this could potentially form into kind of battles for turf between different ethnic communities. The Italians are going to try and take over certain neighborhoods where other people may already be living. Pell Street is also known as Chinatown. And these people, the houses that they're living in are slums. It's very poorly constructed dumbbell apartments, generally between 24 to 32 families. They're poorly ventilated with a kind of a vent stack in the center. And they don't have their own bathrooms. They have to share the bathrooms with the rest of the people that are living in the apartments. There's no privacy whatsoever, and there is a distinct garbage smell. People at this point are just throwing their trash outside of their apartments, and there's no trash bins. There's no, again, workforce to go and collect it. So what's going to happen is these people are going to start to nail their windows shut, and with the type of environment they're living in, hot, sticky New York City summers, it could get very dangerous for them. Also, if there's a fire inside, there's no way for these people to get out if their windows are nailed shut. And not to mention, with the very poor living conditions in these apartments, there's a very high infant mortality rate. Here's what the dumbbell apartment actually looks like. Again, they get the name from it looking like a dumbbell. The air shaft there in the center is there for ventilation, but it really doesn't provide that much. You can see public hallway and living room and parlors, but it's pretty much all shared. Here is what the center of these places would look like. You can see these people are here hanging their laundry. Here's another picture. It's a little bit more clear. This reminds me of West Side Story if you're into musicals. Now take a look at this picture right here. Count the number of people that are in this picture. I'm counting at least 6, and this is pretty standard. Living in this type of situation, very cramped, and again, these people are not showering. You can just kind of see, and even though it's black and white, these people don't look of the cleanest nature. Here's another picture of a family. There is 7 people in this picture. So you can see there's a little crib there in the background and a bed, but this is pretty much their entire apartment. This picture is really interesting to me. This is about 1900. You can see there's a New York City police officer and a detective there on the left-hand side. And what they're doing is they have been investigating this type of living arrangement. Now, New York City had passed housing standards in like 1850, and this is 1900. So they're 50 plus years later where they're still living in this type of substandard apartment. Now, Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis is a Danish immigrant and a social documentary photographer. Basically, he is a social reformer, also known as a muckraker. And a muckraker is someone who tries to create reform within the community. He is going to write this, how the other half lives, and what he's going to do in the other half lives is present the immigrant experience in New York City. And through this, through his photography and through his writing, he's going to try to improve those lives of those immigrants in New York City, because him being an immigrant himself knows what it's like. Here's a few pictures from Jacob Riis and his photojournalism. Again, here's a very dangerous neighborhood, Mulberry Bend. He's going to take a lot of pictures of children in very kind of poor environments. You can see here these children in this kind of a stoop area with no shoes on, trying to sleep and stay warm. This dens of death, this is what the apartments are looking like. They're just, the New York City Housing Department just simply slaps up these apartments as quick as they could to house as many people as they could, and they're just not built to standard. If you couldn't afford a dumbbell apartment, you possibly lived in a shack like this where it was $1 a month. It would be nice to pay that rent kind of at this point now. Again, here's another picture of children. Now, the rise of nativism, and what this is a favoritism towards native-born Americans. And it may be counterintuitive here, but we're not talking about Native Americans or Indians. We're talking about native-born white Americans. And we're okay with immigrants from the right countries, and that's going off of that first wave of immigrants, those people from Western or Northwestern Europe, England, Germany even, okay? We don't want Jewish or Catholics here. Now, the intermediate wave, those Irish, they're going to try to play into the hands of that first wave and say that they're more like them than the second wave. But for the most part, we're still going to be discriminating against those Catholics. And the Chinese Exclusion Act is going to ban most Chinese immigrants from 1882 to 1942. This was originally enacted to be renewed every 10 years, but by 1902, it gets renewed indefinitely. The fact of the matter here is these Chinese immigrants would work for far less than native-born white Americans. So what's going to be lobbied for is the exclusion of these Chinese immigrants. The only Chinese people that could come to the United States would be if they could prove that they were a student, a teacher, a tourist, and we want their money, or a merchant who's going to buy our goods. The other one is the Gentleman's Agreement, and this is going to limit Japanese immigration from 1907 to 1924. And the Gentleman's Agreement is going to specifically limit Japanese immigration. And this was an agreement between our government and the Japanese government to limit unskilled workers from coming to the United States in exchange for the lifting of segregated schools in the San Francisco area. And what is going to be put in place here is something called the quota system. And this is going to be in effect really until the 1960s. 2% of the nationals that are living in the United States could, in fact, come here every year. So depending on what country you came from would determine the amount of people that would be let into the United States. A place like England would have far more immigrants coming here than a place like China, for example. And we're going to leave you with a few political cartoons here. You can kind of see on the right-hand side, it's darkness, and on the left-hand side, there's Uncle Sam there, and you can see in the top right, U.S. Ark. And it's interesting, to me, it's like the Noah's Ark situation where these immigrants are coming in 2 by 2. And you can see in the center there, no oppressive taxes, no expensive kings, no handouts, which, look at this picture right here. You can see these guys that are standing on the dock. They are considered first wave immigrants. You can see in their shadows their humble beginnings. And they're basically telling this guy who's trying to get off the ship, do not come here. We do not want you here. Here's another one in conjunction with the Chinese Exclusion Act. You can see Uncle Sam kicking all of these Chinese people out. And here's another one of my favorites with the Statue of Liberty getting dumped with all of the European garbage onto her feet. And then lastly, we have this immigration restriction and undesirable immigrants. At this point, this is depicting the wide open immigration that we have, and that these immigrants are are going to be here and could possibly cause major harm to us, and bomb being likely to explode. And the urban growth here, you can check this chart out. You may want to pause the video, but Boston grows from 1870 to 1900 by over double, 123% increase. Los Angeles grows exponentially from close to 6,000 people to over 100,000 people in 1900. And on down the line, New York City, it over doubles, 132% increase there. And check out Seattle, from 1,100 people to 237,000. Just kind of interesting to see the amount of immigrants that are coming to our country and the people that are moving within our country into these uninhabited areas. And our recap. You should be able to identify the advantages and disadvantages of living in an enclave, explain how Jacob Riis tried to improve the lives of immigrants, and lastly, describe the response nativists had towards immigrants. So, if you have any questions, send me an email, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.